All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Carl Goulet, and I am the gallery director here at 5 Points. All three exhibitions will be up through July 30th. 5 Points does have new summer hours, starting today, actually. They are now Saturday through Wednesday, 1 to 5 p.m. We are closed on Mondays. But also Thursday through Friday, 1 to 8 p.m. Tonight's talk will be recorded and available to watch on our website later on this weekend at 5pointsarts.org. Joining us on tonight's panel, we welcome three of our exhibiting artists, Kasey Ramirez, Balam Soto, and Anne Soto. Exhibiting in our East Gallery is Kasey. Kasey's drawings and prints explore the tensions between stability and impermanence and mirror the precarious state in which humans find themselves today in the 21st century. Balam Soto and Anne McCarthy have been both inspired by the Greek word dendrites, which refers to trees found in nature, and also to the neurons of the human brain that resemble trees. However, their approaches to art making are vastly different. Anne's silver point drawings of trees highlight the everlasting power of the tradition of art making, and Balam Soto's interactive sculpture uses sound, light, and the effect of the human presence to celebrate art's ever-changing capacity to influence how we think about ourselves and the world around us. Exhibiting in the TDP gallery is Gene Gort. Unfortunately, Gene is traveling and will not be able to join the live conversation, but he has pre-recorded a video on his process, which we will be sharing in a moment. Gene utilizes computer code and programming as a means to produce drawings and animations. Moderating tonight's panel is Matthew Best. Matthew is a Connecticut-based artist. He received his BFA in painting from the University of Hartford Art School, and his MFA in painting from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, working primarily in oil paints. He's exhibited in numerous local, national, and international shows, and has taught at various colleges and universities in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Virginia. I am now going to screen share, and we can watch the video. Give me 1 moment. There we go.
Hi, I'm Gene Gort. I first want to apologize for not being available for this discussion tonight. My travel plans got a little scrambled. Hopefully I'm on a flight somewhere and not sitting in an airport. I also hope you'll excuse me for reading some of my comments. I want to be as succinct as possible in this format. So many artist talks I've attended, the question often defaults to how did you do it? I usually find this to be more a technical curiosity than about the art of it. However, in my case, I've set myself up for this kind of question with the title of the project, Drawn to Code, which foregrounds the use of algorithms to generate imagery. It begs the question of the relationship of the image to the process of its making. Regardless of the tools one uses, I think it comes down to the resulting image and if it is compelling, curious, or authentic. So I would ask the viewer to consider what they are seeing and how they respond to it. The work as I see it is an expression of formal composition using specific mark-making language, structure, and palette, not unlike drawing or painting or printmaking traditions, a document of the process. The use of computer code to generate these drawings is somewhat like cooking or baking from recipes or using a map directions to get from point A to point B. The sequence that you execute the directions results either in arriving where you expect to, or being completely lost, or having inedible food in terms of the recipe. Imagine Googling directions and then reading them out of order. Proceed 3.5 miles and turn left on Main Street, or turn left on Main Street and proceed 3.5 miles. Or in the case of a recipe, A, pour the cake mixture into a baking pan into the oven and bake it for 2 hours. B, preheat the oven to 350 degrees. The order determines the outcome. When cooking, you have an idea for what you want the food to taste like and to look like, but you practice like in a test kitchen. Refine the recipe, ingredients, spices, oven temperature, timing, and the rest until you are satisfied with the result. In this case, the code is the step-by-step recipe you build and test. Each time you come to compile the code or run it, it gives differing results than what you originally had in mind. So you adjust and fine tune. One is often surprised in the process, either because of bad programming mistakes, which can bring inspiring results, or the program just won't run because you've forgotten some essential point that doesn't allow the computer to execute what you had in mind, and it just says no. The process is try and fail, try and fail, try and be surprised, try and fail, try and succeed, be satisfied, or try again, or abort. I find this to be standard studio practice that many artists recognize. Specifically with this body of work, the code I write generates a looping structure based on rules that runs at various frame rates or speed over time, over and over, building a composition and an animation. It will continue endlessly to run this until I pause it or when I tell the program to quit the loop after a fixed number of repetitions. When I feel the code has satisfied what I'm aiming for visually, I extract an image at that moment of the loop and make a print of it. Sometimes I extract a series of stills from the animation to demonstrate the arc of the process and the line accumulation. The piece Red Squares and Curves is an example of this in the exhibition. Using algorithms has particular appeal to me. Repetition, predictability, looping structures, variability, and randomness are concepts at play here. And that is attractive to me. Using a machine to generate options I could not easily perform manually is a helpful tool and is outside my abilities and creates a kind of dialogue that is generative and exciting. The art and the intuition comes from the process I described before. It's fluid, sometimes logical, sometimes reactive, sometimes strictly based on formal decisions, but as a result of my intentions. Even though the results I navigate to resemble what I have in mind, every time the code runs, it creates a slightly different and unique rendering. It's similar to hand tinting and addition of prints, I guess. The structure is intact, and the embellishments of each print is unique. I've used this process also in multimedia music performances and collaborations in the past few years. Work that have used things like volume and frequency of instruments in real time to control similar style of drawings like you see in the exhibition, or to control video playback as projections in a concert venue. Sometimes I've worked with soloists or ensembles and with dancers and choreographers. It is the interactivity of the live response that creates a unique moment that we never experience again, like any performance, no two being exactly the same. Documentation of these works are on my website under collaborative projects. I'm showing some samples of these here now. Lastly, with regard to using real-time information as a source for imagery with code, is the new work in the show, Whether or Not Current Conditions. This project uses live weather data generated by a weather tower on the 5 Points campus as the material to generate images and changes on screen in real time. It combines this information with live RSS news feeds from CNN, Al Jazeera US, and the BBC. displaying current news stories. The weather data controls imagery using wind direction, wind speed, solar radiation, ambient temperature, time of day, and atmospheric moisture. This data is read by the code and generates lines on screen illustrating north, south, east, west wind directions, frequency of the lines drawn from the wind speed, color of the news copy from the time of day, color and thickness of the lines by humidity, and shifting glitched video imagery by both wind speed and color and solar radiation, excuse me. You can think of it as a sort of an abstraction of a weather map using a different visual language. My sense of this piece is that it presents an abstraction of local physical conditions one can experience in Torrington and poses that against global events which have a different effect on us. 5 Points commissioned this work and it's installed permanently at the 5 Points Art Center campus in the lounge, as well as in the gallery for the duration of the exhibition. It will also be available online on the 5 Points website eventually. Currently it's hosted at this URL address and is a work in progress for the moment, part of the trial and error phase of the process I described earlier. I want to thank 5 Points for this opportunity, Torrington Savings Bank for funding this project, and especially my friend Tim Lawless, who is a programming wizard and who I've worked with on a number of projects over the years, and he's helped me to realize the more complicated projects I've designed. I also want to thank Amanda Bunce, a PhD student at UConn, whose own work with the weather tower as part of her thesis, who facilitated installing the hardware and the software for the tower. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions that you want to throw at me or information to share, you can find me through my website, genegort.com. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conversation.
Matt, do you want to jump in?
All right. I'm really glad we got to start with Gene because I thought it was a really great way of explaining the work. Because when I saw the show this week, at first the show to me seemed really different in that there's two more traditional artists and two artists working in new media, but I thought Gene did a really good job bridging the gap between those two for me. So I wanted to come back to one of his statements that jumped out me when, as he said, a lot of artist talks start with this, is how do you do it? And I don't really want to get into the nitty gritty of how you did it, but I think for all of you, the media that you work in is really important to the content of the piece. So I guess my question is, does the technical aspect of your work dictate the content of your work, or does the content of your work dictate the technical aspects of it? So you're choosing the media to go with the content, or is the media influencing the content?
Okay, I can answer from my perspective. I'm a new media artist, and in my perspective, it's the concept that goes first, and I also develop hardware, not just the software, but I also develop the hardware for the installations that I do. So it is the concept that maintains the integrity, and then the challenge comes in either find pre-existing hardware that can emulate through software, what I intended to do, or develop my own software. Like I have developed sensors, and I also am a fan of open source for reasons that I have mentioned before. So in that sense, the conceptualization, it's the first step that I do, and from there, it goes through the process through the end product, let's call it this way. But also, I have the sense of being open to, like, for example, if there is some challenges, or like, for example, now where I need specific chips, and because of COVID and other situations, there is a lack of them, so I have to redesign the idea into something that I can accommodate to it. And I think will be probably the same with a painter. For example, if the color just on suddenly disappear or a pigment, you have to find something that can replace that. So in that sense, for me, it's the idea first, and then the technical aspect it comes afterwards as a form of challenge and acquire new knowledge.
Yeah, he's really good at designing electronics and writing software. He's got both covered.
Thank you.
Yeah. I guess I'll go second. That's actually a really good question. I work in Silver Point, and I think that lends itself possibly to more traditional subject matter. I mean, it's a very traditional medium. But it kind of lends a sort of ethereal quality to the trees, which, you know, adds to its atmosphere. It adds to the image. But I've pretty much done any subject matter with Silver Point. But I will say this about the tree drawings. They lend themselves really well to Silver Point because Silver Point can't be erased. And when I'm working on a portrait, I usually like to work with materials that can be erased or reworked. So that's important to really get a likeness. I mean, have to get everything exactly where it needs to be. And trees, you know, if I'm a little bit off on the texture of a bark or a shape on it, I can still get a likeness of the tree. You know, it's not that the details are totally arbitrary, but they don't need to be exact. So I don't need to worry about erasure, you know, as much as I would with other subject matter.
How did you end up using Silver Point? Like, it's not something you see super commonly. The work is really beautiful, and I haven't seen this number of Silver Point drawings in one place maybe ever. So just curious when it kind of entered your life or how you kind of took up the medium.
I actually learned at University of Hartford. There was a teacher, Fred Wessel. But he really liked to teach, like, you know, Renaissance mediums, and he actually mixed up rabbit skin glue and we primed paper, and that was the first Silver Point experience I had. And I did really like it. I love the sort of reflective quality it has.
Mm-hmm.
And I use acrylic-based paint to prime my paper. I don't really have the patience for rabbit skin glue, but I also feel like the paint is more stable. I could be totally wrong about that, but I've just always preferred to work on it. And actually, oddly enough, at a separate art show, Fred went to it, and I had a couple of the older tree drawings there, and he said that the tones I got with the silver were really unusual. Like, he didn't really see that many artists get such dark tones. And I thought, you know, it was encouraging. You know, I thought, okay, I'm doing something kind of unique with it. And I do really love the range of tonality I can get with the Silver Point.
Thank you.
I loved how you called the medium of Silver Point ethereal, because I agree, and I've always loved Silver Point as a medium, just like it's the quality of it, and it's interesting to think of it as ethereal as well, because it's metal, getting abraded off onto another surface. And I can't think of, that just seems very, like it is very permanent. Yeah, which is something I'm interested in, impermanence and permanence, and what kind of marks and to what extent they can be erased or indelible. I guess the way I found myself towards media, my approach to media is, part of it is comfort, and just, home base for me is drawing. Like that was the first, art form that I was, forgive the pun, drawn to. And I just love the way dust moves on a smooth surface, and I just love how sort of basic it is. And I always refer to it as kind of primordial. I make my own charcoal sometimes. These are, predominantly charcoal. I also use a gessoed surface, which recently I've gotten back into that because of the quality of, when you mix charcoal and water together, it becomes very kind of slippery, and it's really easy to erase, but also it'll dry, and then you can kind of work back into it, and you can scrape it, and it just has this really nice kind of like micro sculptural surface, but that also feels quite like pretty permanent, very stable if I want it to be stable. But I do think there's a resonance for me with something that is dusty, something that behaves like water, like a liquid. And I feel like these I've treated much more like the series of the drawings on the long wall are more like letting water behave like water. And, obviously the subject matter is water, it's the ocean, it's seascapes, it's storms, it's humidity. So I feel like there's, what better medium or, sort of form to represent that than the thing itself, sort of,
One quick question from the Q&A. Christine asked, how large are these silver point pieces?
Most are about 18 by 24 inches. Kind of large for a silver point drawing, but they're not enormous drawings. So
All right.
That's a huge silver point drawing.
Yeah. It's by far the biggest I've seen. So coming back to process, again, I think Kasey and Mariana, you especially, process is of deep importance. Can you separate the process of the work from the content of the work, or are they kind of one seamless whole in your mind?
Well, I think I can speak to that. Well, since I work both in drawing and printmaking, and sometimes, sort of mixing up those two, I think that I work in similar imagery in both, and they both offer different qualities. Like a relief print, like this woodcut, is an entirely different animal to kind of tackle, because it's, you're carving this sheet of wood, and you sort of don't know what you have until you print it. And so there's that element of surprise and mediation that happens. And of course, like accidents and like, oh, I overcarved this part, or, whereas drawing, and I love kind of going back and forth between the two because of that kind of mediation, and also because of the directness of drawing. I sort of find myself wanting directness sometimes when I'm frustrated with a print, and then sometimes I love what an etching does that my hand can't do when I'm just kind of moving around charcoal.
Is it kind of a happy accident sometimes, or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, This accidentally, it got foul bitten, actually. My ground, which I didn't think it was really etching through, some parts of it that were really transparent were getting etched, and then it worked out. It worked out great because it was a lot darker than I had initially wanted it to be. So that's an example.
Balan, I was thinking, can you, in your mind, can you separate process from content? Because it seems like the technology is so inherent to the content of the work and vice versa. Are they kind of the same for you to a degree?
Well, it depends. For example, my work, I have a tendency to have an assessment or an understanding of new media, sort of like a relationship with software and hardware development, where there is a version that comes alive, and then because of the nature of the work, there's always in constant change as technology is, but that doesn't mean that the work has to change constantly. Dynamic in other ways. The first work, and then let's say I have a work that I made the first version of it, and then it time goes by, I see improvements or new elements that have to come along. So the evolution of the concept follows the work in that sense. So I think that can really show that there is a relationship between the content and the materials, but that's always not true in the new media. There are some forms where, for example, there is a technology that is used today, let's say infrared location of motion, and the technology, for some reason, it gets vanished. So it comes the sense where I have to rethink that book. So it goes in two ways. There is no one specific path for content and an idea. It really depends on how I want to take this work. If I want to continue working, or if I think it has reached the potential, and reaching the potential of the work, meaning like the expression of the idea in collaboration with the software and hardware that I have developed or created.
And Mariana, reading your statement, trees seem of deep significance to you. It seems like, actually for both of you, like there's both metaphors in both of your work, but which came first, kind of the image of the tree or the content that they represent in your mind?
I was making tree drawings a little over 10 years ago, and then I didn't for a long time. Oddly enough, I read a book called The Overstory. I think it won the Pulitzer a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And it's basically, it's fiction, but it revolves around trees. And it's just such an interesting book. And I was kind of inspired by it to get back into making tree drawings. But I guess I'm specifically interested in trees that, you know, are kind of unique or have, you know, missing limbs, or, you know, are misshapen. You know, it looks like it went through something, you know, and it just kind of adds to the story of that tree. You know, it makes the tree more unique. So I think that about covers it.
The one thing I was thinking, also reading your statements and viewing the work, is the degree to which autobiography plays a role in at least some of your work.
Yeah.
Especially with the two of you in your installation. Kasey, maybe actually some parts of your statement included this, but to what degree does your autobiography play into your work or inform your work, to all of you?
I think in some ways, I've always kind of felt like artists tend to, in some way, make self-portraits, like their work is some manifestation of themselves.
Mhm.
And I think I can see, I can see that being true for me because I don't know. Although I guess I could, I don't know. My work is, when people just sort of cold read it to me, they're like, it's so dark, it's so haunting. And like, does that mean, oh, I'm a dark and haunted person? I was just thinking about that recently. I think the things that have shaped what what I've become obsessed with these is just a feeling of awe, being in the vast architectural spaces, through I studied abroad in my undergrad, and just having experiences in different countries and different ways of dividing space. I think I guess that's more just like an influence rather than like a kind of an autobiographical kind of element. But yeah, I don't know.
Are these images that you're not making these up? These are like reference photos that you're taking and working from? Okay. I mean, it certainly comes across that way, but.
Yeah, and they're not, I don't have any personal attachment to any of them in these works. They're all versions of construction sites. And I manipulate them, collage them sometimes, and insert the weather.
Balam, I was reading your statement in particular, talking about growing up in Guatemala and living near a rainforest, and how the piece that's at 5 points right now is partially about for both of you, I guess, the experience of trees, of rainforest, the dendrites idea. Could you talk a little bit about that? How?
Sure. You mentioned, I grew up close to the rainforest, and so I have a particular place in myself in the rainforest, and so it is the vastness of a system that persists no matter what, define itself back again into existence, and it is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful. And then Mary and I, we like to hike, and so during those hikes we talk about we're surrounded by trees, and so we talk about trees, and we find very interesting elements in trees, from the concept of random to structural and iteration of itself in a tree, which is something that I think it can be found also in a bigger scale, like in rainforest. So by that sense, something that can be scalable, it can go in large scale or short scale. It is an element of the composition of this work, because this work, again, it can be set on different scales. It can go large scale, or it can go minimum scale, and all the programming that goes behind it, it's actually capable of communicating with other artworks. So the sense of communication between artworks is also something that is also found in nature, the need of communicate. And so by adopting the sense of new media of technology in artworks, where this concept of an artwork being a unique element that is just there, through provide some sense of existence by communicating between artworks and scaling that concept. It's an idea that I've been intrigued, and especially light, working with light, because light has a lot of potential, light itself, and because of light, there is beautiful things that we have appreciated and understand, like the rainforest. So things seems to go back to nature, like Mary's work about trees, and there is nothing more iconic to refer to nature as a tree. And you pretty much go to anywhere, any culture, and you learn the word tree, immediately is understood as we understand a tree in any language or any other way of communication. So tree seems to be a very fascinating natural element that can be represented in so many shapes and forms, and that is the concept of the lights. The lights representing somehow a small representation of a forest, and every time that we present this word, there is a concept of randomness because the lights go in a different kind. There is nothing being said; it has to go this way. So it follows that concept of randomness applied in code and also in nature, like a rainforest, where pretty much it grows in a sense of looking and expanding itself.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. I realized something. We're obviously for this series of artwork. We're both inspired by trees, but his work seems to be more about a forest and the complexity of a forest, and mine is more like portraits of trees, like individual trees. And I didn't just realize that until we were talking. Yeah.
But they're always shown in their context. Like you're very specific about their position and environment within the system too. They do seem isolated, but I was kind of picking up on that too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that, because I do work from photographs, but I'll take a bunch of photographs and find the composition I really like, and sometimes I'll change things a little bit, so it's more balanced. But I really just want to recreate this scene of nature because it's a depiction of, a very specific sequence, like the leaves that are on the rocks, that fell from either previous season or something like that. And it's just, a complex, it's kind of a little story in of itself, and I don't want to overwrite that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's mostly, well, I guess the focus is literally and figuratively on the tree.
All right, we touched on this a little bit, and Gene talked about this as well. It's part of the artistic process I'm particularly really interested in. But he talked about writing code and trying and failing, trying and succeeding, trying and being surprised. To what degree does failure fall into your work? Is failure an opportunity? A few of you talked about this already, like just because with the process issues. Where does the accident fall into this a little bit? Because in some ways, the work seems very controlled, but I think in other ways it is not. So I was curious if you find a balance between success and failure, control and looseness, however you want to frame the duality of this.
Yeah, I think I did touch on that a bit, especially with the printmaking processes of relief printmaking and etching, which, I think especially with etching so basically you have I'm using a copper plate that I cover with an acid resistant ground, and then I draw through that ground with like a scribe, basically scratching into it, and then I put it into an acid bath that eats away at the metal. And that process inherently, you can kind of finesse the process to have as much control as it can offer. But there are, as I mentioned, the foul biting, there's which is just when it bites through and it wasn't supposed to, or it got bitten too long. I think there's, I was pretty nervous until I printed it. And I thought, here's like, I've been working on this etching for like multiple years. And I was like, oh no, did I just, destroy like a few years of work? And, luckily, it was a happy accident. But I think there's different scales of failure too. I think, when I'm working on a drawing, and maybe Mary can speak to this too, like, sometimes I'll get like really sort of hyper focused and, really just kind of lose myself for a while in the process, and then sort of forget to do that thing that your drawing teacher, and I'm always telling my students to do, which is like, step back from the work. You need to see this from a distance. And sometimes that can make, you can lose the whole in a small part. And I think with, I don't know, I sort of embrace when those moments happen, and, oh, whoops, my rag touched that part of my wet rag touched that part of the drawing it wasn't supposed to, and that made a mark, but maybe let's let that dry and then go back into it. So I try to let loose and have a little bit more fun, when I can.
One thing I was struck by in your woodcuts is how the wood grain of the matrix still appears in the, like, to what degree is that letting go of control? Because it's like, it's so prominent in the image, but it works, it adds to the atmosphere of the piece, but you really, as far as I know, can't control it too much. You know more about printmaking than I do, obviously, but like, how do you, it's kind of like a found image in some ways.
Yeah.
Texture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. So with wood grain and woodcuts, you can prepare your wood so that you won't see it at all by sanding the wood to really, really fine grit sandpaper and sealing it with shellac. And but I don't want that. I want the grain, and most of the time I'm trying to make it more apparent or pull it out. And I know I can't control the pattern of it.
Yeah.
But that's sort of where the selection comes in. When I'm at the lumberyard, I'm that annoying customer who's like pulling out 5 panels. That's like, ooh, that's the one I want to do for this next piece. And it's all natural, right? It's like there will be some random knot that might be, everything else is great, and then there's this one knot, and whatever, we'll work with it. You basically you can scratch into it, and that's what this is. It's actually a lot of work to make that background as light as it is. Taking like a wire brush made for stripping paint off a house on the end of a drill, and I'm like grinding the wood down to try to kind of excavate that light. And it is hard to control, actually, but it does take a lot of force.
Yeah. And Balam, I was thinking in your work, I was going through your website and looking at other pieces that you've done, and all of them are dependent of, maybe not all of them, but the viewer and interaction with the viewer is so crucial to your work. And there's an interesting kind of level of chaos to that almost, I think. It's kind of you just kind of come up with an idea, and I guess this is true of all art, but just kind of throw it out into the world, and then, but your work's a little bit different in that it requires this level of interaction from the viewer.
Yeah, you're right. I have, the way that I see it is whether somebody comes in, interact with it or it doesn't. Like you see in this case, the photography on the screen, it's in constant state of rendering back the software that is being used on the machine in a way, in a spherical format. And that changes when the individual comes along and start interacting with the work itself. In that process, the way that I think of it, it is more like an environment where there are a set of instructions or protocols. They are intuitive. That's part of my work. Was work on designing interfaces, and so they are very intuitive, and they don't have a reflection of being computational devices, but more like items. They could be ubiquitous, or the individuals have familiarity with use elements. Like, for example, if you look at this picture, the first image that you see, it's a sound generator device that is just basically made out of plexiglass and wood, and it has aesthetics. So when the individual comes to this and start generating sounds, there is a reaction to it. So there is some sort of like unique and ephemeral instance of that artwork being generated by the experience of this person that came along. And somebody else comes along, and probably is going to have a variation of that experience, or completely unique experience based on how this individual decides to work or use these installations. And it really, the point being, it's that it is to challenge the concept of an artwork being far away and removed from the viewer, to the participation of the viewer into the artwork and the generation of that interaction into a visual aesthetical environment rendered back to the individual. So, it's, I think the communication or the language that is being transmitted to the person that uses the artwork itself, it has a different layers of interpretation, and that depends on the individual that comes and uses it. Part of my work is like, I want to provide the individual an interface where it feels the, let's put it this way, like the individual feels completely safe to use it. It's not going to have an experience where will not understand how the artwork works, or the needs a person that explains and how to use it. And once individual understands the simplicity of the interface, it's pretty much, it goes into a stage of exploration of the artwork itself. So it is in a way, it is an interaction between the artwork and the curiosity of the individual.
I do want to just jump in and play this quick little video so everyone can hear what this sounds like.
And so the artwork has two, in a very simplistic way, two layers of existence. The first one is just being the artwork itself without a human interaction. It is presented to individuals that can really see and enjoy it. And then it has the second layer, which becomes the interaction of the individual with the artwork itself. And it seems to have a different interpretation or presentation to the individual, because when the individual present that concept that this artwork can be touched, and the intention of the artwork itself is to be touched or to be interact with the interface. It really makes the individual to be more curious about how it works, and generate questions, whatever question this person is going to have, and perhaps provide the answers within these questions itself. That is not my intention. I don't try to generate questions or things like that. It is just that I have a fascination of working with technology, and see technology in a way that is not commonly seen, like the code that I use, that I wrote, and that I work with electronics. It has the way that I develop, it is completely different towards a traditional standards of developing code. It is based on how the data flows, and how that data can be rendered back in a visual language or sonic language. That's the reason why I have a tendency to use sound and visuals.
All right. Kasey, you brought this up, and I actually had a question about this. As you mentioned that your work is very dark. And looking at your work, I was wondering if you see your work as being optimistic or pessimistic, or if that's too simplistic. I was torn between whether these structures are being preserved and fortified against destruction, or they're in the process of being destroyed, or are you working for a certain level of ambiguity?
You hit it right there. I think I am interested in the ambiguity. They are, I mean, I think they're mainly, you know, a certain contemporary architecture that's meant to be in some ways disposable, in some ways permanent, in that, like, if you're making a parking structure today, I suppose, you know, it's designed to withstand maybe half a century, but in reality, it can be a lot less. So, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought with your question. You're asking about the if they're meant to kind of straddle the line between.
Yeah, like this one in particular that's up on the screen. Like, it looks like there's boards that are holding things in place. Like, it was kind of like, as I looked at them more and more, I was wondering if these were kind of structures that were coming or going, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and then the weather, there was almost this Turner-like level of kind of dramatic weather. So it's like they're like, or this one, it's either being destroyed or it's being somehow someone's trying to preserve it in some way. I don't know. I just like, because initially it reads very dark, but then it almost isn't entirely. It's kind of, I don't know if I'm saying this right.
Yeah. Maybe like hope punk or something.
Yeah, it's
like resistance. Yeah, I think I see these buildings as they're a metaphor for our collective desire for permanence and shelter and protection. And, you know, through various means, like it might be kind of a tilting horizon, or, you know, the contact, the surrounding environment, or a dissolving edge, you know, that might imply this thing might be going. I think it's sinking, you know, it's sort of like part of it's underwater. But there's like various degrees of that. And I like to play with that. I think some of them feel to me a lot more like a portrait of a building, you know, like this is you know, here's this building over here. But then, you know, I think the etching like above the one that's called Storm, I feel like that one is, and Judy was saying like that one felt very ambiguous, or maybe perhaps the most ambiguous. And I think that was a product of me I took this NASA satellite image of the Sandy structure and superimposed it on top of this kind of scaffolded building, just like a 1+1 kind of like artist, like let's try this out thing. And I liked what happened with it. And I think, yeah, there could be potential with, you know, a series that investigates that.
Cool. All right, one more, and then we should probably open it up to viewer questions. But Marian and Balam, as an artist couple, I'm fascinated by how different your work is, but the more I talk to you and the more I saw your show, the more similarities I start to see. How collaborative are you in your work? Like, do you kind of bounce works off each other? Do you kind of work very separately? Do you work together sometimes? Like, what's your kind of practice like?
Yeah, it's both. Sometimes we work separately. I would work on my drawings, and with this sculpture, Balam came up with the design for the electronics, and you know, figured out how to present it. I helped with soldering wires and, assembling the lights. But like the whole time, we were talking about it and trying to, problem solve. So I see it as basically I see it as the product of his thoughts, but it was also, the idea of it came from a conversation while we were hiking, as he said. And it was basically, he was talking about the rainforest and how person's presence can change it because it's so complex. And we were talking like technology is very similar to that too, especially as it gets more social, which it obviously has. So it kind of became a metaphor. So I guess we collaborated on the concept. And, he designed it and I helped, put it together. And we're thinking of collaborating on a new sculpture, and I'm working on part of it, and he's thinking about different aspects that will go along with it. So I guess it's three things. I work on my work, like my drawings. He works on his sculptures or software, hardware. I mean, he does everything. So he very much is a new media artist. He is always learning, and it makes sense because otherwise it wouldn't be new media. And then, sometimes we kind of join forces and work on something together.
Do you feel as though the new media has any influence on your drawings? Or is that completely separate in your mind? Because it's always interesting, like, work that can seem more based in tradition can often be really influenced by very contemporary art as well. So I was just curious if that's in your case true at all.
I think it has, definitely. It definitely inspires me, seeing him work makes me want to work. And I'm actually somewhat familiar with coding. I have a degree in computer science. I'm nowhere near his level, but and I don't know, I just remember when I was in school learning it, there's just something abstract, an abstract similarity between coding and drawing. In terms of analyzing something, deciding when it comes first, kind of determining contrasts,
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so I think maybe in ways that aren't obvious, I think it has influenced my work.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah, I can say the same. For me, it's seeing Mary and his beautiful intricate works. It affects the way that I think about the nature of software itself, and think more at the same time more and at the same time less of the abstraction of software in terms of philosophical contents. And it is just to see how Mary goes and works in details and spend hundreds of hours working on a small section of the drawings, and all the amount of time dedication that goes into a specific artwork. And it is translated. I can definitely relate to her work because even though there is this idea that if you use technology, all you have to do is just tell the computer, do this, do that, and it does it for you. In my work, it's not the case. I have to pretty much design the whole system and design the algorithms in a way that they're going to provide the data that I need, the data the way that I want, and the time that I want that data. And from there, it comes the creativity of the presentation of the work. It can go from light through pixel representations or sound. So it's basically I think one of the cores of new media is data, and it would be like for a drawer, a pencil, or to use it. So in that sense, we're both having pretty much like the same conceptualization of the work, but in a different format.
And we're both very focused on details.
Okay.
All right. If anyone viewing has any questions, we can take them in the chat box or in the Q&A section. Until then, we can sit here awkwardly or
Yeah, I think something that I think we all have in common, it seems, I was just thinking about, coding and drawing, and I feel like there's the thread in it all for me is meticulousness. Like you have to have a lot of patience, to massage the code. I've, a couple of my friends have worked in coding, and there's also just this magic, and like one backslash can totally change what happens, to a program that you're running or something like that.
All right. Are there any other questions?
Oh, Jenny's asking, is there anything you're excited to try next? Oh, sorry, were you supposed to ask
No, go
that?
for it.
Jenny, I want to set my work on fire. I just think every artist should do that periodically. You just set fire to it. So there, for me, that is an honest answer, figuratively and literally. I have been experimenting with torching wood, which is actually a process. I think one term for it's like carbonizing. They actually do it to like weatherproof wood for outdoor furniture and outdoor like cladding for buildings. But it brings up the grain in a really interesting way. So I'd like to delve into that a bit more. What about you guys?
Something we're excited to try. Is that the question we're answering? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, in my case, I want to gather data from living plants and use that data to do visuals and sound with it. So basically, going more into biocomputing and do some experimentations around it, and maybe develop some sensors or software for that. You?
I'm thinking I might deviate from drawing a little bit, and well, I'm currently working on a sculpture, like clay sculpture, and also I may go back to painting, which is a totally different way of thinking, but I would say I'm definitely excited to pursue those things.
Oh. All right. How do you think you would capture that data, and how much of your work consists of experimentation? From anonymous attendee.
That's actually a good question. It's a lot of it relates on experimentation from the way how to capture the data. One of the ways that I think to capture data will be analyzing photons, which is just basically the essence of light on a plant, or the level of humidity the plant possesses, or how much the plant can be. It has water, so it can be measured the conductivity of it. So there is a few ways how it can be done, and that's what I have immediately. But I'm sure there has to be other methods of gathering information from a natural world, which is probably one of the things that computing is going towards. The integration of biocomputing and itself. So it is a process that it goes along to do some search. And like Mary said, I'm constantly learning about old technologies and new technologies, especially interested in old technologies. Because despite their being obsolete, they still have a use and a purpose to be used. And I also have some works that I have not really put on my website, not my portfolio, but that are based on primers, 555 primers that are capable of providing and gather data. And I may do something with them. I actually was thinking about it. So going back to the answer, that would be new to do some sculptures with electronics, pretty simple sculptures that are functional. They have code and everything to that, but the way they're presented, it's just more like a presentation way rather than the device itself. So it's rethinking how electronics are being seen, not just as an element that drives the all the devices that we're using, but also as an aesthetical element that can provide a visual communication as well.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you to our amazing panelists tonight. And thank you, Matt.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you.
As a reminder, the exhibition is open through July 30th. Right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Mhm.